Okay. So here's a normal VS Code window. You have the file navigator on the left, an integrated terminal at the bottom, and a file editor in the center. And when debugging on VS Code, things go a little bit differently from Jupyter. And of course, you have to learn how things work in this case. So I'm going to go to this the cursed dependencies directory here. And the exercise here, would be to try to run this code on Python 3.7. But I'm going to ignore that requirement for a moment. And instead, I'm going to focus on how do I run this code in the first place. So first of all, I have an environment activated. I know because if I do which Python, see that this comes from this venv here. I did this beforehand, which means that if I do pip install numpy, matplotlib, and scikit-learn, then I should be able to run this script because those are the imports that I can see in the script itself. So I'm going to give it a couple of seconds to install everything. It's installing some of the dependencies of scikit-learn and matplotlib. This is already finishing, installing connecting packages. I will give it a couple more seconds now. And there we go. So I have numpy, matplotlib, scikit-learn. I should be able to run the script. So if I do python plot.py, for now, execution has not started because I am supposed to say these print statements on top. Okay, so apparently there's some problem with the Gaussian process. All right, so now I'm in for a fun debugging session because someone gave me the code and I installed the dependencies that I thought I had to be installing. The person didn't tell me which ones I needed. And so now I need to debug a little bit. Now, how do I debug on VS Code? Well, there's something called debugging configurations. So if you go here to the run and debug panel, or alternatively, you use this button on the top right, debug Python file, then you are prompted with this menu that recommends you to create a debugging configuration. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to click Run and Debug. And then this does something. And this is objectively better than what I had before, because now I have a full traceback here. And I'm doing something called post-mortem debugging, which means the code has already crashed, but I have one last chance of looking at the variables that I have here and try to make sense of what's happening. So for example, you see that I have NP, I have PLT. So these are variables that were created before. And there's scikit-learn as well, but I don't have my scikit-learn.gaussian processes. So if I go to this debug console here, this is really interesting because I have an integrated terminal that is available in this frozen point. So for example, if I do NP, you see this is numpy. So potentially I could do NP whatever, NP a range of 10. So any code that I write is going to work. And I could try to see, for example, okay, so if Gaussian process cannot be imported, what can be imported? So let me try from scikit-learn import Gaussian process, right? Okay, so that's good because Gaussian process works. I can see Gaussian process. there's this module here, and I can see what are the, sorry, I'm failing to use the autocomplete correctly. Gaussian process. And this gives me a list of all the properties that exist in that module. So I see I have a Gaussian process classifier and a Gaussian process regressor. Okay, so that's good, because that tells me that trying to import a class that didn't exist, maybe this is old code, maybe it was broken from the beginning. We will need to keep digging a little bit. But regardless, this was already very useful information. So I'm going to now continue the execution, and that's it. So now, what happens if I want to do some more sophisticated debugging here? So I'm going to comment this out for a moment, in the interest of time. And I'm going to create or add a breakpoint here. So this is very similar to what I was doing before on Jupyter. I'm telling my editor to stop there. But now I'm going to run and debug again. And you see that the execution now is stopped at this breakpoint. So the code hasn't crashed yet. It's going to crash as soon as I access this variable that's not defined. But now I have an opportunity to see what's going on in here. And so let's say that I want to get into this numpy.array function, right? And this is a Python function, potentially. So I should be able to get into it. So let me try to do step into. And step into completely ignores my request to get into the array function. So in this case, I chose a bad example because this is a built-in function. So it's probably written in some other language, and I cannot get in regardless. So let's try something else. I'm going to stop the debugging. I'm going to do from scikit-learn linear model import linear regression, for example. I'm going to just replace this whole thing here. So I'm going to set up another breakpoint. And you see, if I command click, now I'm sure that this is an actual Python function. So I want to get into here and understand what's going on. Let me try to run debug again. This is first going to stop in the first breakup point, but I don't care, so I continue. And now let me try to step into the code again. And as you can see, it ignored me again. But VSCode was kind enough to give me this warning here, and it says frame skipped from debugging during step in. This is because I have a setting called just my code that is set to true somewhere. So what does this mean? If I do create the launch.json file now, I want to debug a Python file. This creates a JSON with some sort of JSON, right? Because JSONs don't have comments, but a JSON-like file that has some configuration. And in fact, there's this just my code setting that I want to set to false. And I will call this configuration something else. So this will not be Python current file anymore, will be current file plus library code. Okay. So you see here that now that configuration is selected, which means that if I press this start debugging button, I can still skip to the next breakout point. And now if I do step into, now I'm getting into scikit-learn, So I effectively changed the VSCode configuration, and now I could, continue exploring here, get out, and so on. The controls are very similar to Jupyter. I have step over, step into, continue, and so on. And now I have an error because I completely destroyed the code, but I'm going to stop it and ignore it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat once more. Yeah, there's nothing new in the Q&A. Nothing new in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. We could go on and on with debugging tricks, but I think this was a good introduction. So I'm going to jump to the slides for some closing remarks.